Welcome to Making Hard Decisions. My name is Alexis Trazier, and I am a USLI University training specialist within our USLI University department here at United States Liability Insurance Group. Most people hate making decisions. Why is that, though? What do you do when faced with a hard decision to which you don't know the answer? Do you opt for the middle road that meets everyone's needs? Do you sacrifice your needs for others? Do you pick what seems to be the most logical, even though you are not 100% sure with the option? Do you put off the decision-making process and hope that everything will sort itself out eventually? People overcomplicate the decision-making process. Fear of picking the wrong option leads to a period of limbo where nothing gets done, and the issue seems to grow bigger and bigger. At some point in either our professional or personal life, we stumble upon a hard decision to make. What is a hard decision anyway? And what do we do when faced when making one? A wise man once said that you will know you have made the right decision when there is peace in your heart. With that being said, our objectives for this session are for you to better understand what constitutes making a hard decision, define what information overload is, rethink your approach to making a hard decision, and use simple techniques to overcome making a hard decision. It's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. So often in life, we have to make tough decisions. Making a decision to do something new usually involves giving up something else. That's what makes it hard. There's a loss to deal with as well as an uncertainty of the future. However, we often overestimate how important our decisions will ultimately be for our happiness and sense of well-being. By making decisions in the right mindset and reminding yourself that you're rarely stuck with whatever decision you make, you'll find it easier to make decisions for yourself, even the hard ones. The decision-making process is never easy. No matter how many tricks you have up your sleeve, you're bound to lose a little sleep over hard decisions. The first thing to consider when presented with a hard decision to make is to ask yourself, is this decision that hard to make, or for some reason, am I making it harder than it needs to be? The process of making a hard decision can be agonizing. It's gut-wrenching and very time-consuming. We spend an inordinate amount of time and a tremendous amount of energy making choices between equally attractive options in everyday situations. The problem is that while they may be equally attractive, they are also differently attractive, with trade-offs that require compromise. Even when trying to make the simplest of decisions, make no mistake, the process of making a small decision, like what to have for breakfast or lunch, can be just as difficult as, say, a much bigger problem like, should I take a promotion at work that requires relocating, or do I have a much needed but difficult conversation with a coworker or a direct report? Let's spend a minute talking about this. In this scenario, while you might not know what you want for breakfast, if you only have waffles, then your only option is to eat waffles, unless, of course, you choose not to eat breakfast at all. Having a difficult conversation clearly seems like a much harder decision to make, one that many people would avoid. But why? Because it seems hard and avoidance would be easier? Maybe for now, yes, but it doesn't do any good to put off a much-needed conversation. When we do that, things fester and get even worse. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the person with whom the conversation must be had with. We don't give ourselves enough credit when faced with a hard decision to make. We may even think that we aren't smart enough to make a hard decision, but the truth is that we have an incredible gift of choice. We have the power to create reason. The choice between alternatives in the decision-making process might not always be equal. Making an easy decision seems uncomplicated. Think about the breakfast scenario from the previous slide. You can eat the waffles or not eat at all. One alternative clearly outweighs the other. We know right away which alternative we will choose. The problem with making a hard decision is that neither of your alternatives outweighs the other. One alternative is better in some ways, and the other alternative is better in others. Neither, however, seems to be the correct fit for us. Now you are faced with a hard decision to make. Hard decisions are hard because sometimes there's no best option to make. Studies suggest that if you can even add one alternate option, you're more likely to make a good decision. This is probably because you're not thinking in limited, inflexible terms, which allows you to be more open to possibilities you may not otherwise have considered. When faced with a hard decision, it is a mistake to think that one alternative is better than the other, because chances are it isn't. If one was better than the other, then the decision wouldn't be so hard. Make sense? Fear of the unknown leads us down the path of oftentimes picking the alternative that represents the path of least resistance. However, as a motivator, fear isn't always a good one. Even taking two options side by side with full information about both alternatives can be hard because they still aren't equal. They're different. Let's talk about information. What product should we pursue? What new business move should we make? Who should we hire for a particular role? We already understand that both simple and big decisions can be hard. For the most part, we are scientific creatures that require information in order to create and quantify the decision alternatives we are faced with. We compare numbers with value, which are not comparable comparison tables. We end up left with many questions in order to help make our decisions that much harder. All of these questions we ask ourselves are followed by more questions, which lead to more questions, and so on and so forth. It seems simple, right? The more information you have, the better or easier decisions you can make. Wrong. At some point, you will cross a threshold where you have too much information. At that point, the information overload sets in, and we begin to fill in gaps and add weight to the information that doesn't really matter in the making of the hard decision process. See, this information comes in all forms. Maybe you researched this particular hard decision you have to make. Maybe you asked a friend or several friends for advice. However you look at it, you will come to the point where you have too much information on the table and the decision-making process has become hard. We have now entered into the making a hard decision zone with what seems like no easy way out. Our first step in trying to get out of this zone is by cutting information we do not need. As with most of the decisions we have to make, we put more weight on them than they deserve. We assign the decisions emotions when really it's us, the humans, that are full of emotion. We allow the emotion of making a decision cloud the actual decision-making thought process. Take, for example, moving across the country for work. Yes, this is a hard decision to make, but is it reversible? Ultimately, the answer is yes, it is. From a professional perspective, think about a time when you may have given out a project or have been on the receiving end of a project assignment. While it may seem like a hard decision who will receive the project, it is one that needs to be made. The fear of the project potentially flopping is real, but reversible if it happens. Most decisions we make don't matter as much as we think they do. And realizing that helps keep the amount of information you take into the process, the hard decision, to a minimum. People tend to overestimate the impact of both negative and positive events on their long-term happiness. Keeping this in mind can reduce the chance of obsessing about a decision and can also help stop decision paralysis caused by fear that a wrong decision may be devastating to your future. There is decent chance that whichever option you choose, in the long term, you will be about as happy as you are now. Try not to give a decision more weight than it deserves. It's especially easy to overestimate the importance of something merely because you happen to be reflecting on it. Let's try it now. Pick a decision you have been struggling to make. Give yourself about a minute to think about it. If possible, take a piece of paper and write down 3 possible answers that could possibly serve as options for this hard decision. In the time remaining, pick the solution that you know to be the correct one. I know what you are thinking. If I spend a bit more time mulling over the decision, a solution will emerge. But maybe chances are that you already wasted too much time sitting on the decision. Why waste any more time? Nothing feels better than the feeling of moving forward. Remember, it's not hard to make a decision if you know what your values are. Think about it. Obviously, I recognize that this simple exercise may not work for every decision you have to make, regardless if it seems like a hard decision to make or not. The point is that the decision still must be made, and we must still move forward. Think about the following questions. If I don't do this now, will I regret it? What am I afraid of? What does my heart say? What am I really doing this for? Who am I doing this for? Will I like myself after the decision? Can I cope with the fallout? When you are faced with a tough decision in life, you may feel paralyzed and at a loss as to what is best to do. When you are stressed or trying to deal with a dilemma, you may question your own rationale and worry that your final decision may not be wise. Again, we begin to think we are not smart enough or qualified enough to make a decision. There are certain questions you can ask yourself when making a difficult decision to find out if your reasoning is good and if you have found a wise solution to your problem. It is sensible to consider the long-term implications of any decisions you make, because you don't want to end up doing something that you'll regret in the future. But it is equally important to consider what might happen if you don't do something. Don't let important opportunities pass you by because they involve making some hard decisions. People often get stuck with decisions because they are scared of what will happen on the outcome. Some people are afraid of failure, but others are scared of success. Ask yourself whether fear is going to make this decision or if you are. Your gut instincts are often the right ones, and you should never make a decision that doesn't resonate with you deep inside. Put aside unwanted advice and judgments for others, and ask yourself if this is something that you really feel good about. The wisest decisions you can make are those that keep the end in mind. Have your goals clearly in mind when making a hard decision. While you might not know what to do, you know what the truth is. You always know, no matter how many people you ask for their opinion, You aren't looking for their opinion. You're looking for them to validate you. Forget about validation. Don't let others' agendas or advice sway you from making the right decision. It is always important to have others' interests at heart when making a decision, but you shouldn't always sacrifice your own needs and desires to please another person. Take a balanced look at how your choices will benefit you as well as others when facing a hard decision in life. Anyone can make a hard decision that ticks all the boxes in terms of a solution without taking into account how that decision may make them feel about themselves. If you make a decision that is callous or uncaring, you might not end up liking yourself very much. When you make one decision, it paves the way for other situations to occur, which you will have to deal with. Making a hard decision in life can have many ramifications. Think things through and decide whether you will be able to cope with the consequences of your decision and how you will deal with any potential fallout. Get clear on what you really want. Don't choose something just because you are supposed to. Remember that doing something trumps doing nothing. Most importantly, remember that you need to practice being decisive. Are you ready to make that hard decision yet? Well, we went over a few of the best questions you can ask yourself when faced with a hard decision to make. Now let's take a look at a few steps that can help us move forward to a possible solution. You absolutely must know who you are in order to decide what it is that you really want. Get to know yourself. Ask yourself the question, who am I and what do I really want? I've learned that waiting to make a hard decision often means that you're not really happy with any of the options because they're either not right for who you are or they don't feel right. Think about it. Is the real reason you may be procrastinating making a hard decision because none of the options feel like the right choice for you? Fear can be deliberating, plain and simple. When faced with a hard decision, we often become fearful of making the wrong decision, the outcome, or what people will think of us. The fear stops us in our tracks. Quickly, ask yourself the question, what am I fearful of? Making a decision, making the quote-unquote wrong decision, or how I will be viewed by others? Quiet the voices in your head or of people in your life so you have identified what is really important. Next step is to stop listening to yourself and stop listening to everyone. Remember, information overload is not always a good thing. It can slow us down and put doubt in your head where it once wasn't. If you're really feeling pressured into making the decision that looks good, step back and examine your reasoning. If you can't come up with a good answer, you know it's not for you. Remember, regardless how hard a decision may appear, it is still your decision to make. We are power creatures gifted with reason. As reasonable creatures, we tend to lean towards making the right decision versus the wrong decision. You will have to deal with the outcome, especially how you feel after the decision is made. Answering to ourselves is often the worst feeling. Use the comparison of is versus ought. What is it that you think is the right decision to make versus what is the decision you think others think you ought to make? Remember that hard decisions are hard because the options we face are not equal and should help us to see which outweighs the other. Remember that doing something trumps doing nothing. Fear is not a good motivator. It can literally stop us in our tracks from moving forward with a hard decision. We are fearful we'll make the wrong decision, but think about the alternative, which would ultimately leave us unfulfilled. Fear of failure is only human. We place a lot of unnecessary pressure on ourselves to constantly be making the correct decisions, especially when the decision is hard. Our mind jumps straight to, what if I make the wrong decision? Remember, it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. Sometimes we fear making decisions because we are afraid of what others will think. If you value your own happiness and view yourself as the ultimate driver of your life, then keep in mind that ultimately you should make your own decisions for yourself. Ask yourself if, before you act, you often worry about what others will think. If you answered yes, it may be that others are holding you back from making a decision. If a fear of social disapproval is holding you back, think about how you alone would feel about the decision. That is, do your best to remove from your mind others who might judge you for your every decision. Remember that doing something trumps doing nothing. Stop avoiding on making a hard decision. Practice being decisive. If you're chronically indecisive, build that decision-making muscle by starting small. Give yourself 30 seconds to decide what you'll have for dinner, what movie to watch, or whether you want to go out tonight. Follow through on that decision. Repeat, and then work up to bigger things. Does this give you anxiety? Ask yourself what the worst-case scenario is if you pick wrong. In other words, if you choose a movie that isn't great, you can turn it off or choose a different movie the next time. If your lunch is lackluster, have something different for dinner. Making small decisions in a timely fashion will actually help train your brain to think through questions more quickly when making those bigger, harder decisions. Perfectionism creates an unrealistic view of the world and can create anxiety and disappointment because you hold yourself to an unattainable standard. No matter your decision or environment, there will still be things that are difficult and that you would not prefer to deal with. If you are torn on a decision-making process and you're waiting for the perfect option to come along, keep in mind that the perfect path is very unlikely to exist. In order to achieve this, remind yourself, when you are struggling to decide, that no decision option is going to be perfect, that there will likely be some drawbacks to each hard decision that you have to make. Remember, you are not alone. The decisions that are ultimately yours to make don't have to come without direction and feedback from a trusted mentor, advisor, or coach. Along the same lines, think about the advice you would give a friend who is faced with a hard decision to make. Sometimes it is helpful to forget for a moment that this is your own life you're deciding about. Imagine that a friend is dealing with a hard decision very much like yours. Visualize their situation vividly, as though it were really occurring to you. Now imagine that this friend asks you which decision he or she should make for themselves. What would you tell them? Keeping this in mind will help us to detach ourselves from the emotions of making a hard decision. Make a decision to be positive, no matter what. Just as it is a conscious decision each day to be positive or negative, it is a conscious decision to accept responsibility for your decision in the best possible light you can. Will we sometimes make the wrong decisions? Yes. But remember, it was your decision to make. Own the outcome. Lastly, have a positive mental attitude. Stand by the hard decisions you make. And most importantly, keep moving forward. I hope that you have found this webinar to be helpful in aiding to make hard decisions. Regardless if the decision has to do with business or our personal life, sometimes there is no clear option. Ultimately, we have to do what we feel is right, regardless of how hard the decision-making process is. It was our objective today to help better understand what constitutes making a hard decision, and define what information overload is, and to help rethink your approach to making a hard decision, and to use simple techniques to overcome making a hard decision.